Hey friends. Okay, so we're going to finish up that chapter that's called Dreams today that we stopped about halfway through yesterday. Um, so we had just read the one where this picture goes along with it. No, my book's not upside down. That's the way the picture is. I find that one rather silly, Sophie said. Boys wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another ring beller. Perhaps you has seen enough now. Let me read another boy's one, Sophie said. The next label said, the telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, Simpkins speaking. Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, what? Who? And then he says, yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son. My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he is saying, yes, sir, very well, sir. I will get him, sir. And he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, is you knowing the President of the United States? And I says, no, but I expect he is hearing about me. Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you'll do it your way. And my father's eyes is googling right out of his head. And that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, get up, you lazy slob, or you will be late for school. And there's the picture that goes along with that one. Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this next one. Sophie started reading the next label. I is having a bath and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, yes, that's a belly button, a funny feeling comes over me and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mommy comes in and says, where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly. So I says, here I is. And she says, where? And I say, here. And she says, where? And I says, here. And she says, where? And I say, here. And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself. And my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course, he is not seeing me. And he shouts, where are you, boy? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, the soap, boy, the soap, it's flying in the air. And I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, you is the invisible boy. And I say, now I is going to have some fun. So when I is out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible. And I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic and everybody yelling, a ghost, a ghost. And people is screaming left and right, and big strong policeman is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet. Here's the picture going along with this one. There he is, invisible, but his pajamas are on. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, boo! And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub. And then I is waking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is a very mystical thing, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is so hooked on it you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other, because their faces is buried in my book, and dentist is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while they're driving cars and is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer the world has ever known. Until my mummy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is atrocious, and so is your punctuation. And here's the picture that goes along with that dream of all the people reading as they go about their lives. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There is dillions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams, I is not having the time or energy to write out long labels, but there is enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. Okay, I'm going to try to turn this book around for you guys, and so then you can see the pictures. Okay, starting here with this one. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. Do not try that at home. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. Oh, dreams are pretty crazy. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I have been wondering how long before you was asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and he opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary sized book. Excuse me, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. See the picture there that goes along with it? One night, he said, I is blowing a dream through the window, and I sees this book lying on a boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand? But I is refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how'd you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time, I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I is reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said. And I is still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Dahl's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? It's by Charles Dickens. By who? Sophie said. Just then there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is all the giants zip-fizzing off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket and then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back home. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at a full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all of us flush bunkling off to England tonight, answered the flesh lump eater as they went galloping past. England is luxurious land, and we is fancying a few nice little English chidlers. I, shouted the maidmaster, is knowing where is a giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself as a froth blower. And I knows where there is a boggle box for boys, shouted the gizzard gulper. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra lick swishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. What is a giggle house for girls? He is meaning a girls' school. Oh, he is meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle. And those giants talk, it's so hard for me to read that part because it's such poor English. Oh no, Kofi sighed. Oh no, Sophie cried. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We is helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and he put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until day is coming back, he said. Sorry, Google Classroom. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. And that is the end of the chapter that's called Dreams. The next chapter is called The Great Plan. And I'm predicting they're going to come up with some kind of a plan so the giants don't go eat all the kids from the boys' school and the girls' school. I wanted to take a minute to talk with you for a sec. We've been reading so much about dreams and the dreams that the BFG catches and the ones he's put in the jars and even the short descriptions. So interesting. And dreams tend to be very out of the ordinary, very unrealistic sometimes. And I don't know about you, but I have been having some weird dreams lately. And I don't know if it's because of the BFG or if it's because we're not in school and my life's a little different and we're home more, or if it's both. But this book is getting in my head a little bit. All right, friends, I'll see you next time. I miss you all. Mwah.